This is looking at essay style and essay technique using an inspector calls as a specific example. So actually, just make sure you get the basics right. When you start writing, make sure you put the play's title in inverted commas, and just for the record, also make sure that you are capitalising an inspector calls. It's also called an inspector calls, not the way we tend to refer to it by abbreviating it, saying inspector calls. Okay, so it's an inspector calls. The first time you write it out correctly in full, and then you can abbreviate it. So in order to abbreviate it, write it out properly, and then just in brackets, put AIC. You can then refer to it as AIC afterwards. Make sure you've got the capital letters in there. And just while we're on that, minor point, when you refer to the inspector, make that his name, make that a proper noun. So make sure that's got a capital I. Priestley, it's that second E. It will actually be written on your exam paper. I know it's really easy to miss off, especially when you're writing under pressure. But if you have any doubts about it, check, it'll be on your exam paper, and remember to put that second E in. Impression marking, those are the things that actually kind of help with your examiner's first impression of what you're doing with the essay. So just looking at how the assessment objectives actually influence what you're trying to do in the essay. So for this one, assessment objective 1 kind of translates to, are you responding to the question fully? And in doing that, when you're writing, are you recognising that the characters are literary constructs, not people? Okay, now reading some of your essays, very, very quickly, the Priestley references drop, and actually you start explaining to me what Gerald's like, or what Sheila thinks, or what then happens to Eric, as if this was an actual historical event. So if you start using the term Priestley a lot, if you count how many times you've used it, if you try and use Priestley, say twice per paragraph, with those sentence starters such as Priestley could suggest, Priestley may convey, Priestley may be using this to symbolise, then you take a step back from treating the characters as real. You don't need to use the phrase literary construct, but it's there to try and remind you that this is a made-up thing that somebody has deliberately written. Priestley has sat there and kind of edited and re-edited a script to try and have a certain purpose in mind. Gerald hasn't said these things and then regretted it later, because he doesn't have that consciousness. Priestley has made him say that for a certain purpose. Next thing, in terms of making sure you're responding to the question fully, is include an introduction which focuses on the keywords in the question. So if you get a question that says, how does Priestley use Mr. Burling to explore the theme of responsibility, you need to kind of turn that round in your first line to say that in his didactic play An Inspector Calls, Priestley uses the character of Mr. Burling to show a number of different types of responsibility. And that keeps you on track, and it keeps your examiner kind of reassured that you're going to answer the question. So turn it round, use the keywords. You can then use a brief introduction as a shopping list to help you with your structure. So if in the example about Mr. Burling and responsibility, you've put in his didactic play An Inspector Calls, Priestley uses Mr. Burling to show to explore several areas of responsibility, full stop. These are not only criminal responsibility, but also social and moral, as well as family responsibility. You've then got 4 headings, if you like, that you can then pick up and use for your essay. AO1 also references your use of quotations, and it's after you actually choosing the relevant quotation for each point you make, that it's short, that it's embedded, and that it kind of makes the point you want it to make. When I say embedded, it should flow as part of your sentence. What you're not doing is writing, is it the one you wanted me to have? This shows, because that's kind of fronting it too much. Okay, it's not embedded. You might want to say instead, Sheila's question to Gerald as to whether the ring is the one you wanted me to have, etc. Kind of flows as part of your own sentence. That's embedding. AO2 is all about looking at deliberate choices that Priestley's made in relation to character, plot, stage directions, dialogue. The way that you're going to evidence those choices is to use quotations to support your argument, and you're going to talk about the effect of each of these. That's where the analysis comes in. So it's one thing to say, Sheila says, is this the one you wanted me to have? If you leave it there, it's like you're just treating her as a person who had that conversation. If you say Priestley uses Sheila's question of, is this the one you wanted me to have? He may be trying to convey gender relations at the time. It's that kind of thing. You have a subject terminology sheet to get in what's counted as kind of technical terms. And it is important that you use those because, again, it'll keep you analytical. You can't be treating Eric like a real person if you're talking about the effect of his fragmented speech as he breaks down upon discovering what Mrs. Burling's done. Priestley uses this to convey that. Okay. You must talk about how, why, and because, the effect of Priestley's choices and his reasons behind them. So actually, I keep using the word didactic because it means teaching. Okay, this play, more explicitly than a lot of other texts, is trying to teach people a lesson. So didactic is a good adjective to show that. And it also means that everything that Priestley's doing has got a purpose. You're meant to, as the audience, you're meant to take something from that. In order to do that, you can use phrases like could symbolise, by extension, and could stand for. Okay, the characters aren't just themselves, they aren't just people who did that. They are representing different types of people, different issues with society. So when we say Mr. Burling's opinions are unreliable, and by extension, Priestley may be trying to convey that people should distrust capitalism, or at least question some of the principles of capitalism, that's giving you an added layer of sophistication to it. Your first keyword, by the way, is port. Okay, assessment objective 3 is context. Okay, these avoiding big, vague statements is a good way of not messing up context. So all women never do anything, all rich people aren't the same. Sound tentative, sound exploratory. So this may be Priestley highlighting the difficulties faced by some women at this point. That kind of thing. You shouldn't have big chunks of history lesson being separate. It should all be integrated in. You can use the word Edwardian for the time it was set. And also big ideas count as context. So a lot of the time when you're writing about capitalism, socialism, men, women, the different generations, you're covering context anyway. As a little aside, don't write V or VS or versus. Use and. So it's not Priestley's idea of men versus women or men v women. It's Priestley's exploration of the differences between men and women, or the conflict between men and women. If you're putting it all together, then this was quite a general question that you looked at. How does Priestley use Gerald in an inspector calls? And I actually doubt that you'd get such a wide question for your actual exam question. What they're more likely to do is to link a character plus a theme or an idea in inspector calls. But if for your revision or if for your understanding or your consolidation of your notes, you kind of do this with a question, you kind of get yourself well prepared, because you can think, how does Priestley use Gerald in an inspector calls? Well, he's using Gerald to make points about different ideas. He's using Gerald to make points about the hypocrisy of the upper class. He's using Gerald to criticise the class system. He's using Gerald to challenge conventional expectations of gender relationships. He's using Gerald to highlight the difference between legal and moral responsibility. If you kind of come up with a broader mind map or a broader plan of these things, then it's going to set you in really good stead, because if you then walk into your exam and you've got, how does Priestley use Gerald to show the relationships between men and women, or how does Priestley use Gerald to highlight inequality, you just draw on the bigger planning that you've done. You think, okay, what do I know that's relevant? So let's just have a quick look at, say, a sample paragraph. If I was marking this from one of your essays. So how does Priestley use Gerald? Well, Gerald is a man about town and he's in love with Sheila at the beginning. The reader then sees that he was probably cheating on her and then finds out that this was with the girl who changed her name to Daisy Renton. The reader doesn't like Gerald as he puts her in the flat for sex. Okay, so how am I going to mark that? Well, Gerald is a man about town. So you've got a quotation, so you get a tick. And he's in love with Sheila at the beginning. True, could we say exposition, to give you a bit of a technical term. Instantly when I see reader, I'm going to get rid of that because I want to see audience. Does see that he was probably cheating on her, but actually that's kind of telling me the story or treating him like a real person. So here I want to look at, well, why has Priestley kind of dropped that in at the exposition? It's, to create tension. It's to establish, his potential for hypocrisy later, etc. This is all a bit kind of storytelling. I'm looking for some analysis. I want some more quotations here as well. The reader doesn't like Gerald as he puts her in the flat for sex is a bit informal. We want to try and sound a bit more academic than that. You might want words like kind of manipulates her, exploits her. So let's look at a better paragraph. In his didactic play, An Inspector Calls, Priestley uses the character of Gerald not only to explore the inequality between the social classes, but also to show the hypocrisy in the relationships between the genders. Gerald is presented as a more complex character than Mr. and Mrs. Burling. He displays some moments of apparently genuine emotion and insight, but also represents the status quo. As a member of the aristocracy, Gerald would represent the reluctance of those benefiting from, and I can't read the bottom bit, it seems to be too small. No, I can't move it up either. Ah, well. You get the idea. You're going to get a tick for didactic. You've set that out properly. Priestley uses the character, so highlighting he's not real, of Gerald, not only to explore the inequality between social classes. So my first paragraph is going to be, how is Gerald used to explore the inequality between social classes? And then my second set of paragraphs, or my second points, are going to be relationships between the genders. I might want to write, about his genuine emotion and insight, but also the idea that he is kind of a member of the aristocracy. He doesn't want things to change, so he's naturally going to side more with the conventional Mr. and Mrs. Burling. So then you can look at using a topic sentence to keep your essay on track, and I've underlined what would count as a topic sentence. That's the first sentence of a paragraph that basically signposts to your reader what you're going to explain. It's kind of like a headline. So here we say Gerald's relationship with Sheila is used by Priestley to show how their initially conventional roles change during the play. So you start off knowing that actually the point that I'm going to deal with is that Gerald and Sheila start off conventionally and change. Okay? The rest of that then starts to explore those points. So during the exposition, AO2, Priestley count high, shows Gerald as an aristocratic young man take control of the relationship. Sheila's question, AO2, because it's a method, about the engagement ring, is it the one you wanted me to have, quote, embedded, demonstrates the fact that Gerald is used to taking charge and making decisions, tick, effect. Gerald has a confidence that comes with his privileged upbringing, point, and that allows him to recognise the correct way to behave. Mrs. Burling recognises he introduces the ring at exactly the right moment, evidence. I might want to develop these points by exploring Gerald's comment of, I think Miss Burling ought to be excused, because conventionally he wants to protect Sheila because she is his fiancée, she is the woman he's going to marry, and women need to be conventionally protected from things. But it also shows that he's prepared to protect the right type of woman, but not Eva, and also his hypocrisy, because it's self-interest. He doesn't want his girlfriend, he doesn't want his wife-to-be to hear the details of his affair and how badly he's behaved. What you will have to do is, as you go along any text that you study, is to consolidate your notes and make sure you've got what you need on characters and themes. This means that any lesson you've missed, you've copied up work from, but also that you're using the resources available to you. You've got your class notes with all the points about each character and the themes that Priestley uses them to explore. Your starting point is that really you've got to know the play. If you use your class notes, study guides, online guides to come up with your ideas on each one. These should be ideas that you're comfortable with, that you're happy that you can explain and evidence and use and revise from. There are all sorts of different levels of material available to you. And if you buy every single study guide or print out every single thing, there's too much, you'll go mad, okay? You need to find your way through that material, okay? Make sure you've got a range of points, that you haven't just got the same point over and over. And if you're aiming for 7, 8 or 9, make sure that you're exploring ambiguity. Make sure that you're exploring how to argue a point both ways. The Art of Drama, Inspector Call's book with points for 8 and 9 is particularly helpful for getting the sophistication for this. The best form of consolidation and revision is to actually plan essays to revision questions. Really, highlighting and reading over are the least efficient way of consolidating and revising and getting familiar with stuff. It is far better to spend 45 minutes looking at the sample questions, picking out the one that you think, if I got this in the exam, I really couldn't do it, and using all of your notes and the internet and all the resources at your disposal to spend those 45 minutes doing a mind map or doing a plan to think, actually, now I could deal with that, than it is to spend an hour and a half staring at highlighted notes. work with the material. It will make it a lot easier for you. Your second and third keywords, by the way, number 2 is burling, and number 3 is homework. Okay, please enter those into the Firefly quiz to prove that you've listened to this. Okay, bye.